In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus comes announcing the inbreaking of the kingdom. And then Matthew presents to us what we usually call the Sermon on the Mount. We've come to call it the Sermon on the Kingdom, or if you will, the Sermon on Kingdom Living. This is the core of Jesus' message, and he almost certainly repeated these things on other occasions. We know of at least one other time recorded for us in Luke chapter 6 in what we usually call the Sermon on the Plain. But if we're serious about the kingdom of God, about being a disciple of Jesus, and about obeying everything Jesus commanded, then this message in the sermon is going to get a great deal of our attention. But we will not really get what's in the sermon unless we get what comes at the very beginning of it, and that's what we call the Beatitudes. In my book, No One Like Him, that I wrote about 10 years ago, I call these the kingdom attitudes. They're the essential attitudes that characterize one's life if he or she is going to have a kingdom heart. When we think of the relationship of the Beatitudes to the rest of the sermon, there are a number of metaphors and images and analogies that come to mind. If we envision the sermon as a great spiritual mountain that we need to climb, then the Beatitudes should be seen as the boots that we've got to get on, that any climber will tell you are so essential to the climb. If we try to go without the boots, we'll end up getting some pretty bad blisters, and we'll probably take some falls by the time we get to such teachings as don't resist an evil person and love your enemies. Or to change the image, the Beatitudes are like the alphabet. They are something you must learn early, but they are something you must keep using the rest of the way. Try skipping over them and your spiritual life will end up only being so much gibberish. In a similar way, in order to live the life of the kingdom, we must internalize these Beatitudes, or else we're like a basketball player who's trying to play the game without ever mastering the art of dribbling and passing. And just as a coach will often bring his team back to those fundamentals whenever their play gets ragged and sloppy, we often have to come back in our lives to the Beatitudes as we seek to live out the kingdom. It's interesting that we call these the Beatitudes, for these are the essential attitudes that must be in our lives if we're going to live the kingdom. I know that play on words works only in English, but it is good for those of us who speak that language. When we find Jesus' words in the sermon to be irritating to us or burdensome to us or frustrating to us, a key rule of the road is to always come back to the Beatitudes. If we find our relationships with other people that we're traveling this road with to be broken or somehow in a state of tension, the answer is always to get back to the Beatitudes. It's our observation that just about everything we are called to do in the rest of the sermon somehow finds its roots in the Beatitudes. And probably that's true of most everything else we're called to do in the rest of the New Testament. We will benefit greatly by focusing on them carefully. Jesus is going to go on to some specifics in the sermon, some things that sound a lot like new laws to some people, although I think that might be to miss the point. However, before he goes on to the specific examples, he starts in the Beatitudes with the inside of the cup, knowing that when you take care of the inside of the cup, then the outside takes care of itself. The Beatitudes are all about the new heart one has on the inside after hearing and responding to the call of the kingdom, after hearing it and repenting. as Jesus describes in Matthew 4:17. In our second volume on the kingdom, Steve and I will be completely focused on the sermon on the kingdom life, but we'll be spending a considerable amount of time at the beginning focused on the Beatitudes. That book won't be out for a while. I hope you won't wait for the book to start meditating on those crucial qualities and start focusing on having those attitudes in your life as you pray for God's kingdom to come and His will to be done on earth as it is in heaven.